This program has been made possible in part by
We spend a lot of time on our crochet and knitting. So on today's episode of Knitting Daily, we'll explore ways to care for our creations. Hi, I'm your host, Eunny Jang. I'll begin this episode with a lesson in washing and blocking your hand knits. Then fiber expert Deborah Robeson will join me with a lesson on cleaning and caring for your fiber before you knit. On today's crochet edgings and trims segment, Kristen demonstrates fun trims that'll add a pop to your creations or purchased linens. Add lace to pillowcases, handkerchiefs, and more. This technique adds volume and depth to your finishing. And finally, I'll wrap up this episode with a lesson in duplicate stitch. You can fix weak areas in your knitting before they become problems with this primer. So let's talk about washing and blocking. I've got all the tools that I need for me here, along with a sweater that's seen some better days and could use a good cleaning. One thing that I do want to point out to you is that sweaters don't really need to be washed every single time that you wear them, unless they're actually soiled, like something's gotten on them, or you've been wearing them in an exceptionally dirty, smoky, dusty environment. They probably don't really only need a good wash, probably once a season or so. In between times, you can air them out and brush them to restore any nap that's been lost. But when they do need a washing, and you definitely want to wash before you put a sweater away for the season, to prevent moths, certainly before you store them, or when it just gets too dirty, a really good way to go is to use something like a no-rinse wool wash and wash them by hand. You can wash almost any fiber at home this way, unless it actually explicitly says do not wash. So I'm going to add just a little bit of wool wash to some tepid water. And this particular wool wash only needs about a teaspoonful per gallon of water. And you do want to use tepid water. You don't want it to be very, very hot or very, very cold, especially with animal fibers. Temperature changes in the water can shock the fibers into felting, and that's the last thing that you want. So you're going to add your wool wash. You're going to stir a little bit to just make sure that it's mixed in there. Then you're just going to add your sweater. Make sure that the fiber is saturated. Push it underneath the water. And then for most wool washes, especially no-rinse wool washes, you are going to want to let them soak for about 15 minutes. And that's to make sure that the soap penetrates all the way down into the fiber and works out any stains that are sort of buried deep inside the stitches. Once it's soaked for a while, I'm just going to move this over here. Once it's soaked for a while, you're going to want to take your piece out, and supporting its weight because wool becomes very, very heavy when it's wet. You're going to want to squeeze out as much water as you can just by hand. You can squeeze or press against the side of your sink if you're doing it in your sink, or just kind of however works. You don't want to twist or wring it or agitate it because those things will also cause felting. So I'm just squeezing out water gently without stretching the sweater. I'm kind of supporting its weight underneath so that no parts of the sweater pull out of shape. And I've pressed out most of the water that's going to come out just by itself. You want to move over to a towel, and a thick, thirsty bath towel is a good choice to use here. Even 2 towels if your sweater is especially large or has a lot of yarn to it, like an Aran sweater or a sweater with a lot of texture. Kind of spread it out on the towel into a single layer. And then this is the most efficient way to get most of the water out of your knits. Just roll up your knit in the towel. And then when I'm at home, when I'm washing my own sweaters, I usually will actually stand on the towel. But just put any kind of weight on it. Just put as much weight on it as you can. And that will encourage the towel to absorb all the water that's in the sweater. Once you unroll your towel, your sweater should feel just barely damp to the touch. So remove it. We can put this towel away now. And then once your sweater has been washed, it should be fairly dry actually. It should feel just a little bit damp. You're going to need to block it back to its original measurements. Blocking is just that. You're actually restoring the original shape and measurements to it, making sure that it's not stretched out. So the first thing that you can do is just kind of spread it out as much as you can into sort of a single layer. Take a look at any areas that look like they need extra finessing. And then you want to make sure that you're working on a pinnable surface. So here I'm using an actual blocking mat. It's made out of these sort of interconnecting pieces so that you can arrange it to whatever shape that you need. But a clean bed or a clean mattress with clean sheets on it will work. Any surface that you can sort of pin into will be fine. For some sweaters, this might be all you need to do, just spread it out into the shape that it originally was in. For other sweaters, you may need to actually aggressively go at it with quilter's pins. So the way that I like to block is usually by taking a pin. These are rust-proof quilter's pins, T-pins, which are nice because they won't rust. You're going to want to start at the corners of your work. And if this is a sweater that really needs to be fitted just so, then you can absolutely work with a tape measure and make sure that this distance is the exact distance that you want it to be or that it originally was. You're going to do the same thing kind of at every corner of your work. Put in a T-pin anytime the work kind of turns an angle. So we'll get one at the shoulders, at each end of each shoulder, and so on. Now, it's all well and good to have a sweater that's this wide here and this wide here, but what do you do about the waist? So you probably don't need the sweater to be this wide here. So this is when you start working with more T-pins. Kind of at each section of T-pin, use another pin to bisect that section. Then grab another pin and bisect that section, and then the next, and so on, using as many pins as you need to make the sweater edge lie evenly. You don't want little ridges and bumps from pins and the sweater pulling tension on them. So you want to just make sure that the sweater is exactly the shape that you want it to be everywhere that you want it. At the same time, if the sweater has texture elements, you can kind of plump them up. You know, if it has cables, you can sort of plump them up with your fingers, prod and pull, and make sure that all edgings are lying flat. You can do all those kinds of fabric manipulations to make sure that your sweater is just the way that you want it. And then most sweaters, especially in wool, will take some time to dry completely. Once the sweater feels completely dry to the touch, on the inside and on the reverse side, you can remove your pins carefully, making sure not to pull anything out of shape, and then put the sweater away or start wearing it. Another tool that can be really useful in blocking are these long, thin wires. These are actually called blocking wires. And these are great for very delicate fabrics or for a fabric like in a shawl that has an edging, where you don't want to spend your time pinning out every single one of these points. Something like a blocking wire can be really helpful. All you need to do is thread it through each of the points, and then you can just pin the blocking wire in a handful of places, rather than needing to pin every single point individually. And so I hope that these tips on blocking and washing will keep your hand-knitted and crocheted garments looking as great as the first day that you made them.